This week's Martha's Collection feature is an antique blouse that I'm estimating to be from the 1900s. It is fashioned from a cotton embroidered net, a tambour net lace, and that has a cute little sort of tulip design pattern to it, and then little dots. And underneath it was a silk taffeta. And then also was a kind of vertical pin tucked piece in the front panel here. This poor girl, the silk has not fared well from time. And I had fully intended to take out the old lining on this and put a new lining in it. But once I got the old lining out, I just fell in love with that sheer lace. So I left it as it was. And that actually ended up being quite a project. But here I'm going to start with removing all of the metal hooks. My concern is if I were to soak it with all of these hooks in place, that they could catch onto the net, the lace, and do damage. So in order to get those off safely, instead of a seam ripper, I used a surgical kind of blade and then cut along the metal to just kind of slice the thread. It's kind of dulls the blade, but it does a better job of protecting the garment. So little by little, I cut out all of that silk shattered lining, and that took a few hours, but out it finally came. So in addition to taking out the lining, I removed the collar. So to better protect it during the soaking, I added a piece of hand-basted twill tape. And I'm going to do an initial soak here in just distilled water. Distilled water has impurities and everything kind of boiled and steamed out of it. So for this initial soak, and when a garment is this kind of old, sometimes I like to do distilled water just for an initial soak to get the kind of general dust and everything from the decades out. And just doing that, you see here that yes, the water has turned color. So we are getting some progress. I'm going to use retro wash for the next soak. And I debated on which product to use. I wasn't going to do a sodium perborate or something that kind of more intense, but I was really hoping to get a little bit of the yellowing out, and retro wash has kind of helped in the past to do that. And you can see here that yes, that water did turn brown. And so I ended up doing 2 rounds of that. So I did 1 hour for the first round and 1 hour for the second round, both of them with 1 tablespoon of retro wash. And then I did some rinsing, and you can see here the color's a little bit lighter, but it does end up being an ecru shade, which I personally love, that it is this beautiful kind of antique shade. Put it on my mesh rack and did some more rinsing. And now at this point, she looks really sad. But don't worry, she'll get pretty again. So then I let it air dry, and then here I'm addressing that stained little tab that just did not brighten up. So I ended up replacing that. I was able to get a tiny little bit of net and created a new tab. Also with Martha's collection was a box that was marked white lace, and in it was this piece of lace, really fine, delicate lace. So I decided to give that a quick wash, and that I used to replace that vertical pin-tucked silk front panel. Now to replace the collar. So the collar was pretty bedraggled, and of course that lining was shattered and not fared well. So I pressed it to be able to make a pattern from it. I took the boning pieces off of it and created a paper pattern using that. I took the boning pieces and used a photocopy as a reference to where they were originally, and then hand stitched those onto a fine piece of cotton that was also from Martha's collection. Now this was a piece of lace from my stash that was absolutely perfect to put as a replacement piece on top of that collar. So to shape it while it was damp, I just kind of coaxed it along in place on the collar to shape it, and then I stitched it by hand onto that cotton base. And that's just really the best way. I mean, of course, you could do it by machine, but this definitely calls for doing it by hand. This part I was able to do by machine, and that was stitching the neck onto the bodice. So to create a loop for the hook, you do that by hand. And I did 3 of those out of a little bit thicker thread, and that forms the closure for the back neck. Now the waistband was in pretty rough shape, and that was silk as well. So I put a new piece of vintage taffeta to recover that, and then sewed on one of the original hooks and then made a loop for that. I decided to do snaps instead of hooks for those tabs, as I felt it would be safer for the hooks to not catch on to the net in the future. Look at how pretty she is through the light. That lace is just gorgeous. So there's a little close-up of that tab and then front panel. And here you can see the befores and after. I love the shape of this. I love that little pigeon breast front, which was so called because a pigeon at the time had that lower kind of protrusion. And now 120 years later, she's ready for another special day.